let's have some fun.
Yeah.
Let's make some predictions.
Yeah.
Where do you think this whole industry is going to be 2 years from now and 5 years from now?
Maybe one good way to put today's episode will be people who have built workflows in the last 10, 15, 20 years, they'll have a lot to take away from here. How do they upgrade themselves to agents? Agents, agent, all these words. First of all, I don't like the word agentic too much. Good morning, Amit.
Good morning. So, you excited about this episode?
Yeah, looking forward. It's a new setup.
Yeah.
It's indoors, although, as you can see, we've kept the windows open to see some birds chirping here as well. But I'm looking forward to it. It's a hot idea. It's at the same time, we have to make it real and actionable.
Yeah.
And I know you and I have talked about this. In fact, we're building companies in this space too. The idea of agents. If anything, at DevRev, we call it AgentOS because it's a platform, i.e. our version of Windows. And then, of course, we have apps like Microsoft Windows Office was those apps. Agent, to me, is a really near and dear term. And so it is for you, I hear, at A79i.
Yeah.
And of course, the thing that people have to take away from today is what's new, what's similar, and how do you bridge the two?
Yeah.
What do you think?
First of all, I'm surprised that you went straight to Windows as a platform because for those of us who grew up professionally in early 2000s, there was such a stigma with Windows.
When you go and do a public company, you look at Windows rather than Mac. At least when you deal with CFOs and such and data people. But jokes aside, I still have a ton of respect for what Microsoft did in the 90s. And if anything, Linux copied a lot from that. So we probably have an episode of that alone. But what do you think of agents?
Yeah, so I am super thrilled about agents, and I know a lot of people, but it's such a vague term. And the definitions are abound. So, like, when I think about agents at a very abstract level, the thought that comes to mind is, you know, how Danny Kahneman kind of talked about system 1 and system 2 of brain. And system 1 is this like fast, intuitive thing that quickly gets you answers based on a lot of internalized experiences. Sometimes it's wrong. But system 2 is this slow, deliberate process of thinking. So it uses system 1 for intuition, but then it adds a lot of method to it and checking and verification and exploring the search space, and eventually comes up with an answer that's often a lot more reliable, but it's much slower system. And so in my mind, essentially agents is this idea of LLMs provided us the system 1. And now, as an industry collectively, we're trying to figure out the design for system 2 so that we can get closer to the dream of AI.
You mentioned the word atoms and molecules, so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so, the other way that I think about it is that when you make a call to LLM or you make a RAG call, it's like one of the atoms in the reasoning. And you have to string a lot of them together to be able to solve meteor problems. Right? If you're just looking for an answer to something that can be inferred based on what was provided in the context, then like one call is enough. But if you're trying to solve a problem that requires multiple steps, it's like a RAG call is an atom, and what agent is doing is essentially a workflow on top of that.
So maybe one good way to put today's episode will be people who have built workflows in the last 10, 15, 20 years, they'll have a lot to take away from here. How do they upgrade themselves to agents?
So you mean like workflows that, like for example, ServiceNow would let you build, or what are some of the other examples of workflow?
Yeah, there's a whole continuum.
Yeah.
And in fact, it'll be good for us to look at the history of workflows in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
It used to be 20 years ago on-prem, and then ServiceNow brought that whole idea of thinking, what does it mean for especially no-code, low-code people
Yeah.
who are not developers.
Yeah.
In IT, for example, to build automations and you put a WYSIWYG on top of it, what you get, drag and drop. It's a little bit like a Visio. You can connect nodes, their edges. And they went on to define it in a way where you could do things like if then else and loops and switch statements, cases, and went on to wait until, wait for, maybe even external events, things like that, timers, all sorts of things. And of course, these are advanced ideas of automation. And for people who are low-code, no-code people, they could build extremely complex automatons out of these things. But then there's also the left of the spectrum, which is data integration. A lot of these were data workflows, a simple if then else. Event comes from a data change. Companies like Workato and Zapier and Pipedream and MuleSoft, they're all doing a lot of pub-sub like thinking, which to me is simple, shallow things, but at the same time are very useful. So I would think that there's a whole continuum here, which is all the way from data workflows to simple workflows to complex workflows. And they all happen to be deterministic. And now with AI, I think we're going to add some probabilistic nodes to it. And LLMs will be such atoms, and they have a new role, especially things that humans had to do, sitting in triage meetings and doing clustering, classification, routing, and deduplication. A lot of these things were multi-pass efforts that humans used to do that I feel like AI nodes in old workflows can actually provide that level of probabilistic thinking. That will be very powerful. Yeah, I think the last 20 years of workflows will play a big role in this as well, because otherwise, if it's something very new and if it's something so different, agents, agentic, all these words, first of all, I don't like the word agentic too much. I feel like it's functionality, just like the word functionality never existed in the word English dictionary. But then Silicon Valley added it, like, we'll use the word functionality. I think agentic is one such word. But what do you think of the word agentic itself?
I think all of us have a sense of what the future of software looks like. And people are trying to define it in different ways. And somehow we have converged on this word agentic. So it will start meaning something that probably it didn't mean before. And I think the meaning hasn't converged yet, right? And essentially, agentic means you're doing multi-step things with LLMs. Like you're combining workflows and LLMs.
Yeah. And we also, again, if we have to build a successful software at DevRev, we have to connect it back to the old world. And one of the words is workflows. And we're trying to define the word skills. And then agents. And then we have defined the word manager or orchestrator around this too. Because as you go back to composability of atoms and molecules, the simple workflows are also skills. And then you take them a step, but the more complex ones are also skills. You add AI nodes into it and they become real humanoid workflows. But at the end of the day, we are looking at the word skills as a bunch of workflows, or maybe it's a bunch of search skills, or it's a bunch of analytical skills. So there's really three kinds of skills. There's search skills, there's workflow skills, which used to be deterministic workflows, but now they could have probabilistic thinking attached to it too. And finally, there's analytical skills, which I think in the last 10, 12 years, you guys actually defined text to SQL and thinking about what does it mean to get text from a conversational interface and really kind of look at spitting out charts and bar graphs and histograms and things like that. So these three kind of capabilities, or you can call them sets of skills. Search skills, analytical skills, and workflow skills. And then how do you compose all three of these? And that to me is the real challenge and opportunity as well. What do you think of that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. And the challenge right now is that there's such a wide spectrum between the dream and the reality, that the dream is that we can all sip Mai Tais at the beach and the agents will be doing all the cognitive work that we used to do. Obviously, we are nowhere close to it, and some people will say it'll take 30 years, some people will say it'll happen in this decade. But the real challenge of the moment is that what can we achieve in next 6 months, in next 1 year, and start returning some of the massive investments that has gone into this.
You mean like $600 billion?
In terms of real business value. So tell me, what are you guys doing in terms of building agents that's actually deployed, that like you built it and you're like, wow, this thing works? And I would have had a hard time believing that this thing would have worked maybe a year ago. And like customers are going, wow, this makes my life better.
So for one, let's define the periphery of the enterprise, and then we can get to the core of the enterprise, because the skills at the core is knowledge worker skills. Of course, there's the periphery of the enterprise, the call center agent, and there's L1 agents and L2 agents. And then as you go deeper into L3, L4, it starts to really blur the lines with knowledge work, deeper context, memory, what are the rest of the back office workflows, and how do you really connect it back to back office workflows like GitHub and testing and all this stuff as well. So it basically gets into the realm of incident management, and of course over time into managerial questions that people ask and so on. So I feel like the world is really excited about the periphery stuff, which is great. I think it's the most achievable stuff to get right, which is how do you do lookups, which is what L1 agents have been good at in the last 30, 40 years of 50 years of call centers. L1 agents were good at knowledge-based lookups and answering questions. L2 agents, and we're talking about human agents right now. We still not talked about AI agents, and we'll talk about that persona of an AI agent as well. But L2 agents were good at simple workflows, account lookups, where is my order, things of that nature. Large number of transactions, but shallow transactions. And then from there you go to L3, and all of a sudden we're talking about alerts and incidents from cloud and feature requests coming and things like that, or there's a bug, things of that nature. Now that's L3. And of course, L4 takes it even deeper into 9-month orders, like, okay, my feature request, and where is it, and how long will it take? And now it has tentacles in development and sprint planning and all sorts of things, and multi-sprint feature rollout and stuff like that. So it gets deeper and deeper. So we have taken this sort of approach that you have to look at from both sides. From one end, this is basically what can LLMs provide. And LLMs are a giant call center worker for us. It's an amazingly perspicacious and wise call center worker. And now we need to help it understand context and intent. And I think that's where a lot of engineering challenges will be. What is context and what's intent? And some of the context will actually be in the cookie of the chatbot. Okay, which IP address, which region are they coming from? Who's the user? Did they use this product or not? Because you could have a ton of context to look up based on the product, based on the region, things like that. So there is that challenge of context, establishing context. based on which you might have to go through to a sliver of workflows or a sliver of the knowledge base as opposed to everything out there. I think it's going to be a very important engineering challenge to really go and solve for. And if you didn't solve it, you'll have more hallucination, more noise in the system and so on. So I feel like a big part of this is, did we establish the context and did we go and quickly segment the lookups, whether it's really a search engine lookup or it's which workflows to go at? Because you imagine if somebody's using a product A, like ordering a car versus ordering food, these are two different products. There's Uber and Uber Eats. And the knowledge base articles of Uber Eats are very different than the knowledge base articles of, my driver I lost my cell phone in the car that I took. Very different lookups out there. So you got to establish the context of the user.
Yeah.
And of course, like you think of companies that are global, there are 150 countries they operate in. The standard operating procedures of each country is different. So the L1 agent for South Africa and the L1 agent for United Kingdom have to look through different documents for what lookup means and how do you do this, how do you do that, is based on local laws and things like that. So imagine a KYC workflow of South Africa versus UK. The search has to be segmented for what's going on in the UK articles versus what's going on in the South African articles and so on. Now, all of this has to be automated and done right. And I don't think anybody has thought through these things. So it's a big challenge and an opportunity to segment something, give them a swim lane as soon as you know the IP address they're coming from, the cookie that they have, the product that they use and things like that. Because these are the basic questions L1 agent asked.
Yeah.
Where are you calling from? What products do you use and things like that? And it's an immense opportunity to personalize it. The more preferences we have of the user, the less questions an LLM will ask. So that's one, which is how do you segment and provide context? And then the second piece on there is, okay, so how do we establish intent? Is this a how-to problem or is it where is problem? And these are two different things.
Yeah.
And the how-to problem is something that's sitting in some sort of a knowledge base, and you need to do a really good job of search and deflection. Or if it's a where is problem, then you're really talking about a workflow, like where is my order and why is my account not showing the payroll check that I submitted and things like that. Simple workflows, but these are simple workflows.
Yeah.
And of course, as you get into L3 and L4, now you have to really get more context. It's like the alerts are coming from your microservices and your pods and Kubernetes and all that stuff. And the complaint is that I can't get this feature to work. And so that's a symptom, but there's another symptom coming, which is alerts from your cloud systems. And now you got to correlate those two as well. So now these are more complex workflows and things like that. And of course, it gets into massive amounts of deduplication problems and classification clustering problems. So now the AI nodes will need to come in for the workflow to actually be intelligent. And of course, you go deeper into the bowels of the back office in L4, and L4 agents have to do so much more with respect to who are the developers and what did they check in the last week and all the good stuff. And even deeper, null pointer exceptions happening. So what can agents do to patch it quickly? And so now you can see that it gets into developer workflows as well. So to me, I think what we have really tried to figure out is define skills. And skills to us are in one of these three pillars. They're either search skills, you're really good at search, and analytical skills. We'll talk about those maybe a little bit later because these are managerial skills. You need managers to actually build dashboards and reports, and they're also really good workflows as well. And finally, there's the workflows that the end customer, which is our customer, is also trying to go and really define. So it's actually a pretty broad problem. And to get the human out of the loop, as you said, it probably is a multi-decade journey. Remember, we talked about paperless office in the 90s, right? And we still have so much paper. I was in Germany.
Just printed stuff for our episode.
And I was in Germany just last week, and you could see how much paper still is.
Yeah.
I had to take shower at the airport, and I had to fill out 3 pages of paper for that. So you can imagine how much paper that we still have. So I think this is very similar. The idea that we have to, and that doesn't mean that we take human jobs out. We just have to elevate people to do bigger, better things. And we'll still need a ton of people for doing more elevated workflows. But the AI agent persona, how do you really introduce them into a culture? Whether it's a US culture, which is a West Coast, East Coast, Midwest culture versus Western Europe versus Eastern Europe versus Asia, Japan. I think there's going to be a huge amount of design work as well. Because people somehow feel like these things will take away my job or not. And I think there's a lot of design thinking here as well. And this happened to robotic automation in the last 25, 30 years as well. Factory workers were obviously opposed to it. You just heard about Hollywood. The way they actually got done with the strike was they said no AI in these union jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
There was so much work that machines could actually be doing in Hollywood. If anything, like the work of transcoding and all this stuff probably has been automated for the last 15 years, and Netflix has done an amazing job using the public cloud for those things and so on. But imagine if union workers are saying the final bastion in actually going back from strike, which happened to actually really affect the industry for like close to 6 months, something like that, was no AI. So we're dealing with a lot of that. And we have to really go and figure out which industries will actually be better for this versus not. And honestly, again, I'm digressing from the technology side of it, but it's equally important. Think of doctors and the medical association in the US. They're so opposed to immigration because they want to control everything. They're like, okay, we got to really have scarcity. And I think it's no different. In some sense, we are seeing AI agents as the immigrants. And how do you really weave them in and get this figured out will be an opportunity of a lifetime. There'll be the innovators and early adopters in the industry. There'll be verticals that adopt this more than others. And there'll be other verticals that actually will be laggards as well.
So let's get to the meat of it, and let's put on our engineering hats a little bit, right? So the biggest challenge in my mind in the agent space is that there's a wide spectrum of how conservative or aggressive you get. So you can get very aggressive and claim things like autonomous software, like what Devin demoed and what some of the other people have done. But then later on, you hear that like it was a very pretty demo, not quite works when rubber meets the road, and you get certain amount of marketing cachet by demoing something that looks pretty advanced, but then it falls flat. On the other hand, like stuff like text to SQL, we are able to reliably make it work. But it almost feels like to a lot of people that's not sexy enough. They feel it's already done. It's super hard. And then there's like various things in between where people are saying we can do a lot of work that paralegals do, a lot of work that customer support people do. So where are you finding the right sort of frontier where you're pushing the technology hard enough and yet you're not over-promising, you're actually delivering value to the customer?
So it again goes back to the window. So if you look at the interface of, I don't want to use the word chatbot because chatbots used to deliver a lot of promise but flatter to deceive in the last 5-7 years. And you could see that with a lot of chatbot companies in the last 5, 7, 10 years, including Intercom, which started out trying to do bot building. And there's a lot of rule-based stuff, decision trees. It's like a glorified IVR. To do customer support, press 1. to do English, press 9. There was that IVR thinking that was going on in software as well. And that is now, at least, we don't have to go and argue that's not going to work. Bots are done. And they struggled for the last 10 years. They're flattered to deceive. We use them for simple things like if then else on a website when somebody's coming in as a lead, and what does it mean to route them to the right place. And people have spent billions on this. There's companies like Front and Drift and Intercom, all that selling to the CMO. But now we're getting a little serious on the chief customer officer side, which is support, customer support. And if we can get the right AI with the right UI, and we'll talk more about both of these, I think there's immense value in L1 and L2. And how it gets to L3, L4 with incident management and things of that nature is where the real machine's job becomes awesome. Because there's millions of alerts every day that's happening. And how do you really dedupe it, cluster it, classify it, route it? All that stuff is where machines will become really, because humans are inundated anyway with a lot of that stuff. So there'll be no competition between it's my job or human job or an AI job. We need machines to really go do that. Because the systems of record are inundated with 1,000 copies of the same alert, same incident. So there'll be immense value in solving incident management. We're very passionate about incident management. We'll talk about that and vector databases and things like that too. But we've delivered a lot to a lot of our customer support people. And look, there's those out there who are beating us up on context and intent, a little bit on hallucination as well, and moderation and things like that. But I feel
by those you mean customers, not competition.
Customers, and in a really good way. I feel like they're making us better, and our RAG skills have become, which is retrieval augmented generation skills, have become really good. And I think at the same time now it's about prompts versus RAG, right? And how much prompts do you use, and how do you really go back to RAG and know that, look, there's parts of it that you need to actually affect through the prompt, which in my head is how do you communicate with the machine? The other way to communicate is through workflows too, by the way, because at some point you need to go and run something that's a whole lot more like an automaton, and it knows how to talk to legacy systems through APIs and look at your bank account and cancel your ticket or look up your order in an order management system. All these things are workflows which will require API calls to legacy systems as well. So I think now the real challenge and opportunity is that at an L1, L2 level, how do we do simple interweaving of RAG versus prompts versus simple workflows? And I would think that this itself is a really hard engineering problem. Now, as you go deeper into expert systems, people who are experts and they're trying to build avatars of themselves, where they have deep content that's, I think, for the last 20 years of books that they've written and videos and things of that nature, how do you really weave their prompts with their search lookups and things like that? I think reasoning and all that stuff becomes very important, because now you have to do lookups from RAG, from their book, from the chapter, from the paragraphs, and then go and ask more questions, because now it's consultative, which is a whole lot more than these simple agents that are at the periphery versus knowledge work versus deep expertise that people actually have out there as well. I would think that delivering value at the periphery is in the realm of possibility right now. It's going to be a large market, but the place where these companies that are only doing conversational agents will suffer is that the moment the human handoff happens, now we need to go and build it against existing work management systems and ticketing systems and support systems, ITSM systems, which are the traditional workflows of the last 20 years. I mean, the industry has given them category names like ITSM and support CRM and things like that. So I feel like a lot of these conversational agents, when they have to hand it off to humans, because we have to acknowledge that there will be a handoff. And if you're not, and if you're saying no human in the loop at all, that's where this industry will flatter to deceive. And being able to really hand it off to systems of record is going to be the opportunity and challenge. Even doing routing right, for example, is a really large workflow problem, because you talk about skills of agents, but they're skills of humans. And you'll need to figure out how to take it from an agent that had a few skills, like search skills, like workflows, a simple workflow that they were doing, to now saying, look, I can't do this, I need to hand this over to a human, is a routing problem. And once you understand what routing is, it can be done through rules. We had routing engines in the last 30 years for customer support staff and support managers doing this by hand. And now all of them are demanding, look, people go on vacation, there's new skills coming on, people are learning new things, have so much attrition, new agents coming on board, their skills got lowered all of a sudden because they're new people. Skills are changing all the time. So static routing can't work. So I would say that the big opportunity for AI is, how do you really take human preferences, their context, to really go and do a lot of routing, do a lot of clustering, classification, deduplication on the fly. And if we did this right, this is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. I would say tens of billions of dollars of market right now is spent in triaging, which really is a combination of who are the people who have the skills and who are the ones who got onboarded recently, and how do we really route it to them?
Yeah.
And imagine doing that in the realm of AI agents. Is the exact same problem. We will have these orchestrators, or let's call them AI agent managers, whose job will be to figure out the schedules of agents, skills of agents, and what does it mean to really route between them. Because on an everyday basis, developers will keep chugging in new skills into a workflow bank, automatons they built recently, which are more complex than what they had earlier, and so on. There'll be more knowledge-based articles that will keep adding as well, which are, again, new skills, new SOPs and things like that. So how do you really get this idea of routing figured out is going to be as hard a challenge in the AI agent space as it is in human agent space today.
Let's really get down to details. So I remember in 2007 when I joined Google, one of the most useful talks for me was called Life of a Query, where somebody said, this is what happens. The user says this, then it goes to this indexing system, then it goes to this lookup system for feature engineering, then it goes to this ranking system, and then it goes to this result aggregator, and then finally it gets displayed. So let's take one example of what enters into your system and what all happens and what comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with, let's say, a conversational agent that's sitting on a website.
Yeah.
The user pops it open.
Yeah.
We have transferred the identity, as a JOT token, which, by the way, is the sort of ground zero for any of this to work. We need to get the identity without asking them, who are you? So either it's an authenticated user or it's an unauthenticated user. And by the way, both of them have different contexts. There are things I can show to an authenticated user, which is deeper than what I can show to an unauthenticated user.
Yeah.
So there's a context establishment right then and there. Then, of course, I need to know about their cookie, which is like what IP address they're coming from and things like that. But let's say that we have figured that out.
Yeah.
I take that JOT token in the inside. So I have now gotten a permission from the app itself. Because remember, I'm an applet that's sitting inside someone else's intranet or website or application or things like that. So I need that handoff to happen. And once I have that, I can pass this on to the rest of my APIs. So what's the first thing the conversation agent does? It tries to identify intent. And that intent will actually...
And this is based on the user saying something.
User saying something.
For example, the user might ask,
how do I? For example, how do I cancel my ticket? Right. So now this intent needs to be classified, and the LLMs have become good at this to say, okay, this is now really a RAG problem. I need to look up something, because I could have done this with a simple flat prompt, but it doesn't go too far. I can't
And
have
we're talking about service ticket.
There's no ticket yet.
Yeah.
This is still a conversation. Remember,
No, but the user said, "How do I cancel my ticket?" Are they talking
this
about
is
like plane ticket?
airline ticket.
Airline
Let's say an
ticket,
airline ticket. Ticket is a ticket. It's a system of record.
Yeah.
There's a record in the system that I had an airline ticket, which is no different than I filed a bug as a ticket in software as well. So pretty much the same thing, actually. But how do I cancel my ticket is something that the system should actually say, look, I don't want a human in the loop in this. I don't want to actually make a call to a call center. I don't want anybody in tech support to really come in. Can I do this? And the job of the L1 agent is to say, look, you can go do this to this website, things like that. So it's really a RAG skill. And the LLM should be able to go and forward you on to some exact 2 paragraphs and things like that into a RAG pipeline. Now, this itself is a great perplexity-like experience that has not been delivered in the enterprise up until now. Because on an everyday basis, there's lots and lots of knowledge-based articles that are being added. Some of them old, some of them new. So you need to, this is also a ranking problem, before it is anything else. Now, once you rank them and you have relevance, you need to pass it on to augmentation generation engine. So if you go really deep, the way you chunk these documents, the way you put the previous chunk in the next chunk and all this stuff, the way you point the URLs to the original documents, because the original documents could be sitting in Google Docs or Notion or SharePoint or some other place. All that is a hard engineering problem. And how you deliver a perplexity-like sort of summary right up there is what people are really looking for. And of course, you have to figure out explainability and how do you point back to the exact paragraph in the right document. So a lot of work that most people don't realize how hard that challenge itself is, opportunity itself is, So you do that and you're back to the agent and you think there'll be more such questions. So now if you're in that one loop of RAG only, the problem is fairly well defined. Again, deep problems in context and delivering a perplexity for the enterprise to explainability and traceability and all that stuff. Lots of data structure problems, lots of deep search engine problems to be solved for. And by the way, there is value in syntactic inverted index search as well. I think because entity search and things like that, you can actually get real exact results out of syntactic search as well. So we should not forget about the 20 years of Google inverted indexes compared to the vector databases that we talk about.
There's a lot of power there, and a lot of times people forget at their own expense.
Absolutely. And now then there is prompt-based simple reasoning. So you can really do that as well. But the challenge right now, and we are actually going through this right now, is how do you interweave them? What does it mean for you to start to bring back some RAG results and do consultative stuff, which really is more L3, L4 kind of stuff.
So let's take a concrete example.
So let's say we have a consultant who is a deep consultant who is, and we're dealing with this right now as we speak, is somebody who's deep in negotiation. And now they have a person who actually wants to do conflict resolution. Now you have to go deeper into the books of conflict resolution and what are the tenets of human conflict and what does the process mean? What's the substance mean? What does it mean to really go through the 10 books that they've written in the past and which paragraphs of these books really matter and so on. And at the same time, it is not something that would have been done in 2 minutes. It probably is a back and forth. And you need to take something, you did a lookup, you also had some prompts, and the prompts gave you some ways to answer back something. But now, how do you do a lookup from a paragraph of a book and ask questions as opposed to just answer? See, because what we have actually been good at in L1, L2 is given a question, I can answer. Given another question, I can answer. But given a question, how do you actually go deeper into that question? By doing a lookup in, let's say, a document, a bunch of documents, videos, and images, and books and PDFs and things like that. And you're saying, and what about that? And what about that? So you are actually taking it deeper.
Yeah.
Is a really hard problem.
Yeah. Actually, one of the things that I often tell my team, and I really believe, is that giving the answer is valuable, but figuring out what is the right follow-up question to ask is 10 times more valuable.
Yeah. And I think this is a 10-year journey.
Yeah.
I feel while we'll talk about reasoning from, let's say, OpenAI's O1 point of view, but it'll still be shallow unless it really knows how to really go and look up something in a relevant cluster in neighborhood and come back with more questions. Now, I can hack it up with a prompt because that is a relevant neighborhood that I can provide. But the thing is that if there's so much enterprise data of the last 20 years with millions of lines and paragraphs and transcripts of videos and things like that, that it can't just be flattened in a prompt. This has to be a combination of what you gave in the prompt versus what you bring back from a RAG and then go back and ask questions. So how questions answer is the question itself are the kind of things where the handoffs from one baton zone to another and so on will be, I think, a decade-long journey. But coming back to your question of what is in the art of possible, we cannot forget the workflow engines of the last 20 years. You still got to deliver on them. Because if you didn't, you're probably in a realm of froth, as opposed to there are deterministic things that LLMs can actually invoke as well. And you can put a little bit of an AI node in them, which does probabilistic work too. So how we really do this probabilistic conversational thinking that LLMs bring with deterministic automatons that are out there dealing with all sorts of legacy systems and API calls and things like that will be a very important piece of this puzzle as well. And the next 1 to 2 to 3 years, I think workflows will get modernized. And this is their opportunity where you're starting to put a clustering node, a classification node, a routing node, a deduplication node, an attribution node, an augmentation, reconciliation of data node and things like that. I think we start putting those nodes together. Now we have really good atoms where the LLMs will be interleaved with the rest of the stuff that the industry has done in the last 15, 20 years, which is deterministic API calls and getting responses back and so on. And of course, you're weaving that with switch statements and loops and wait for and wait until, and all those things are still relevant. Now, you can do a lot of this stuff in a prompt only. Because if you try doing all it in a prompt, it will become hallucinating. There's some power of edges and nodes that will be probably much more high quality and reliable than if you try to do everything in a prompt itself. Now, don't get me wrong. I think people will use prompts to generate the wireframe of a workflow, which could be 60, 70, 80% right. No different than the way people are using Adobe Firefly, for example, or Midjourney or whatever to generate images. But then I need the vector representation so that I can edit it and bring the last mile finesse and polish it. I think the exact same thing with workflows will also be true. I feel that those are the kind of things where the old world of workflows needs to meet the new world of LLMs itself. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you did, but maybe we could get down again to some concrete details. For example, let's say that I'm a customer of ServiceNow as it existed before 2022. And now I have this new beautiful Agentic workflow engine. What do I get new that I couldn't get before?
Let's take a concrete example. For ITSM, one of the key things is incident management. Now, in the last 20 years, ServiceNow has done a good job of creating tickets out of alerts. Now, what's the hard part in all of this? That there's probably 1,000 copies of the same ticket. So unless you're really good at vector databases and thinking about n-dimensional search, you won't be good at incident management in the future. AI's job has to be about being reductive. How do you reduce that 1,000 alerts down to one and connect it back to this one incident that connects back to one ticket that connects back to maybe 3 different issues in GitHub? That to me is the holy grail of all of this. And if we really reduced a million alerts down to 3 incidents and then knew that these 3 incidents are happening in these 2 microservices, which had a check-in in the last week. Now you see how we are connecting the GitHub space, some dimensions of an incident, to the microservice space, to what's happening in a feature on a website or a mobile app itself. I think it's a space-time thinking, because I also have to bring in time. Okay, the microservices were down in the last 10 minutes, and that's when the user support ticket came in. And by the way, the GitHub stuff was checked in the last 4 days. So flattening all of this into a space-time lookup to really say that we have been able to look at all this as 1,000 duplicates of the same alert into a single incident, and this incident is this ticket. And this ticket actually could very well be this check-in that happened in the last 4 days, is something that has to be solved for. Because if AI can't solve this fairly well understood problem, I think we've just not done justice to the industry itself. And incident management is at the core of a lot of stuff that happens out there. And I feel it's one of the holy grails of workflows. And if we don't have great on-call agents and great support agents, I think we can do justice to this. So I think I would say that ServiceNow has done a really good job of no-code things for the enterprise. A lot of IT people who are not into writing code, they could have built these kind of automatons in the past. But I think without adding these probabilistic AI nodes in these workflows, and the one I just talked about is the deduplication one, but it could be routing as well. Because I need to now route it to the right developer who could have done this and so on. And then weaving in events coming from machines, not just events coming from humans, which is a complaint or a ticket, but events coming from machines like alerts and incidents into this is, I think, a great opportunity in the next 3 to 5 years.
And just to dig a little bit deeper, I think what you're saying is not just that this ticket and this ticket content-wise looks the same. You're saying something like, I've got a bunch of disk-full incidents and a bunch of service down incidents, and they're really the same thing.
Yes.
Because the service is down because disk got full. And being able to make that connection, right?
Absolutely. And then knowing that, by the way, these user requests or complaints that were coming in actually connected to this microservice, which had this machine failure. Honestly, sometimes it's also like the region is down. So you now connect the substrate, which is AWS region, to these things as well. So I think the idea of really being able to look at the neighborhood is probably one of the biggest problems this industry will have to go and solve for.
So this gets me really excited, because my fundamental theory about agents is that for agents to succeed, you need 3 bodies of knowledge. There is the knowledge that is easily accessible from systems of record. Like you can read a file, you can call an API, you can run SQL. There's a knowledge that's essentially common sense knowledge and world knowledge that you can get from LLMs. But then there's a third body of knowledge that's mostly locked in people's head in your company. And it's very specific to your company. There may be some generalizations that you can do across the industry verticals and things like that. But there is very specific knowledge that employees of an enterprise have that makes them capable of doing what they do. And these are busy people. They have no incentive to sit down and provide you data based on which now you can build these automations. And unless you have a way of capturing that, none of it is going to work.
Yeah. And by the way, some of this is actually now locked in Slack or Teams. And we're talking about low-hanging fruits here. Who broke the build? It drives me nuts that people actually go ask this question on a Slack channel with 100 people. Because some of these things we have to use AI for.
Yeah.
This is a simple workflow of saying who broke the build is probably kept in a build system somewhere or a test system somewhere or a CI/CD system somewhere. We need people to interact and collaborate with the LLMs probably way more than we collaborate with 100 people in a channel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's a total waste of time and actually quite disruptive
Yeah.
for these things to happen. And I feel like Slack and Teams don't know what's coming on them. 10 years ago, we said collaboration is Slack and Teams, better than email. And they provided a way to organize information. That information organization was channel-based. Each channel was a cluster where you actually go and deterministically go and say, if you want to go and have a conversation around this topic, you go to this channel, right? Unlike emails, which had 5,000 threads that were all around the same topic. So they actually had ways to organize information and it made it a little bit better. I feel like vector databases and what you could do with ideas of clusters in vector DBs provide for a way better way to collaborate, where what people are saying or doing is actually ending up as Q&As in a vector database. And now you can collaborate directly with the LLM itself, with the vector database itself, as opposed to having to do this on a Slack channel. The topics are being created in clusters, probabilistically in clusters, and now I can do distance vector thinking to actually go, as opposed to, well, I have 7 channels in Slack that look very similar now, and it's become really hard. So in many ways, we're making steps in the right direction. And going from emails to Slack was a big shift, where we were now able to do real-time collaboration with people. But taking this human knowledge and in real time going and indexing this without having to do static channels in Slack and letting it be dynamic clusters in the vector database is, I think, going to be a great 10-year advancement from the last 10 years of collaboration that we had talked about.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. Like I have, and like many people have this obsessive thing about going and reading every unread channel. And you spend 20, 30 minutes doing that. What did I accomplish out of that? Not much.
Yeah. I mean, there is value in discovery. Think about it. Basically, just like we are letting vector databases crawl and index, we have an LLM up here too.
Yeah.
And I think that there is some value in crawling and indexing Slack channels too.
Yeah.
I do this just for that reason alone. And therefore, I don't know if it will go away, but I feel like we could have more relevant stuff there.
Yeah, triage.
Because the repetitive stuff can actually be going against a vector database directly or something. But why is it an important piece of agentic thinking? I feel like we can build a lot of these low-hanging agents and workflows directly off of machine data. And a lot of human knowledge can be given to a machine to really go and deflect as much as possible. And deflection is a low-hanging fruit, not just for an end-user customer who's coming in through a website or a portal, but also internally, I think it can play a huge role. And I can tell you this, that deflection is like the way Google search built search engine 20 or 25 years ago. There were 10 search engines before that, and then there was a Google. I think there'll be an exact same consolidation happening in this industry. There'll be probably, 500 bot companies trying to do this stuff. And there'll be 2 or 3 that will be doing an awesome job of search.
That actually brings me to the question I had in mind. I was going to ask that let's put ourselves in the shoes of an enterprise buyer. Their life is really hard right now if they want to do something with AI. Because there's a tsunami of startups all raising their hands saying, hey, we've got AI, we've got agents, we've got RAG, we can do this and we can do that. If you were in their shoes, how would you think about and sort the market into stuff that's going to be helpful to them.
Yeah, you can look at, I mean,
So I wanted to make another point before we jump, which is like the default is go with the safe, right? And so a whole bunch of enterprises went and invested in Microsoft Copilot because Microsoft looked like the safe option. And you're seeing the repercussion of that. A lot of people are saying Copilot just doesn't work, and it was like a lot of vaporware promise.
You really don't have Azure credits. In the last episode, I thought that maybe you wouldn't, but this time there's no way you do.
It just annoys me to hell that people think this is a safe option and go to Microsoft and then end up with crap product. And then they have this impression that AI doesn't work or this doesn't work because they tried it with Microsoft.
Yeah, look, we'll have to go through that again. This happened in the .com boom and bust too. I feel a few things that they, or even what Claude is doing with CodeGen on the GitHub Copilot side, probably has relevance for people in the periphery, the young people coming out of college. This is their way to learn stuff. What they used with Stack Overflow was extremely syntactic because inverted indexes had to work there for Google search and Stack Overflow to actually work. Now I think can actually be done a little bit better because CodeGen had promise. So there is some GitHub Copilot that is actually working. I feel like the email and Teams search is a big Copilot opportunity. Microsoft will probably make a Perplexity-like thing work with its own data, SharePoint data, Exchange data, whatever, Outlook data, and Teams data and things like that. I would not discount the value.
They're great people. I have amazing friends there. It's just that they have the
But they do crap products then.
They have the ability to push a lot more than what they have. Promise a lot more and then sell than what they have. And that just distorts the...
And honestly, at the same time, I feel like this goes back to Windows and SQL Server and many of those things. I think they'll make it good enough for a lot of good enough use cases to work out. If anything, that's the promise of Llama 3.2, for example. It's going to be good enough at 8 billion parameters so that you don't need to go to 2 trillion parameters or something, you know, and so on. So I think there is something on the periphery that they're actually working, which will actually be relevant for everybody out there. And they're just trying to make Outlook search work and Teams search work and email if-then-else work. There's a lot of if-then-else things that people want out of the emails as well. Email is at the core of a lot of system of record thinking for these enterprise workflows, whether you like it or not. Sales workflows, like people actually getting to auto-reply to things and so on. If those things can be done at the periphery, it's still very powerful. So they have their systems of record covered, I feel. And people will build prompts to imagine an SDR building a prompt for an email that came in from someone. I think there's going to be a lot of power in just making email automation work really well. You know, email is still a big jam, actually, you know, whether we like it or not. But I think coming back to your question in the enterprise, I think they'll really expect hallucination-free stuff. And as you and I talked about, they would rather, if you say, don't cook this up and answer, just give me the fact that you don't know what you don't know. They'll expect high quality values out of search, like results out of search. They'll want people to say, okay, bridge this with workflows now because I've built workflows the last 20 years and what will this look like? And I think there is a lot of the itties of the enterprise, like authorization, security is a big deal. Like, what does it mean for me to only read articles that I'm supposed to read, not the other articles? Because you can build a great vector database, but if it doesn't have authorization built in, you're breaking the promises that the enterprise made to its internal users, you know, for example. We have to make delivery and like exactly once work. There's a lot of these things that are coming as events. Workflows have to be restartable when they crash, and we need to make sure that they're ordered as opposed to out of order and so on. So I think there is some real itties of the enterprise that have to work because the buyer in the enterprise, most of them for a good reason, because they're dealing with community money, which is the company's budget. They have to play it safe. There's a fear of messing up rather than fear of missing out.
Yeah.
So we have to think about the 80s of the enterprise, and they'll test the heck out of this. And I think the best ones will emerge out of this really well. Going back to, there were so many workflow companies 20 years ago, and one or two or three have survived. SaaS companies have struggled on workflows. I want to give an example of how difficult workflows are. The biggest conflict right now in the SaaS world right now that many people don't know of or talk about is Workday versus ServiceNow. And it's a real, I would say, drama behind this. Because Workday thinks they actually have the HR buyer as their biggest friend. And ServiceNow's biggest buyer is the CIO. So they're the CHRO, or Chief People Officer, and a Chief Information Officer. And they've both bought two different systems. One has bought an HR system, one has bought an ITSM system, which also does great workflows. But Workday's workflows are not that good. So now the CIO is saying just use ServiceNow's workflows. And this just goes on to say that if people are talking about agentic and agents and all this stuff, it's easier said than done to really build these agentic systems for low-code, no-code people in IT who want to be able to go tinker the last mile of what this workflow or agent handoff needs to look like.
So here's a more concrete question, right? So if I'm an enterprise buyer, first thing I have to figure out, what problem do I want to solve? So a lot of people are doing enterprise search. Let's go buy something for enterprise search. A lot of people are doing customer support bots. Let's go buy something there. And then you're like, okay, but AI is a lot more than that. What else can I do? And there's like a sea of things to look from. And so that's one confusing part. The other thing is when you have figured out what problem you want to solve, and you feel like there's a reasonable shot of solving it, then you have to pick who do I solve it with. And you could go with the familiar safe names, but a lot of times those familiar safe names are actually laggards in innovation, and they'll disappoint you. And this field is moving so fast that there's a big difference between sort of people who are playing it safe and laggards versus people who are innovating at the edge. And that's where the difficulty is. If you want some of that, how do you sort the wheat from the chaff?
And you and I talked about this,
Yeah.
that benchmarking plays a big role in this.
Yeah.
Even in my last company, we used to talk about virtualizing storage, distributing it amongst a bunch of commodity hardware nodes. And we had to build really good stress tests for this to make sure that if you pull the power plug, do you lose data? And if you put thousands of workers on this, how does it actually melt down or break down? Is there a cliff? Does it actually have a knee in terms of performance? What about thundering herd problems, things like that? So we got to really think about building great stress tests because the incumbents are not going to do this.
Yeah.
They will market a lot. Think of Agent Force. Okay, whatever Agent Force is, at the end of the day, they first have to figure out how to build a great vector database first and to build a great inverted index that scales and to figure out ranking and all that stuff as well. So I think it behooves us companies to actually build the best stress tests in this as well and put it in a way that's one-click automated in a POC environment, things like that. And I think the doers and the people who really are the ones who are saying, I need high quality stuff, they'll get this. Now, there will be a top-down selling that happens, CIO down or CCO down or CMO down. That will also happen. But these days, I think in the last 10 years, they've also said, look, I need the technologists to also go vet it.
Yeah.
So I think it behooves us to actually build the best automations and stress tests in a POC for things to actually be figure out what's the wheat, what's the chaff itself.
So now if you're a startup that's pushing the boundaries and innovating, I think what you're saying and what we're talking about is one of the best things that you can do is put out believable, trustable benchmarks and force people to evaluate things on the dimensions that actually matters and not just read some fluff in marketing.
Yeah, and by the way, there's one more thing, which I think ServiceNow got right that many other workflow companies didn't. For example, extensibility, and we saw that with Apple iPhone versus BlackBerry. Extensibility, right? The idea that you could actually go and extend the platform and collaborate with the community and with the customer, by the way, and the customer's partner, whatever that system integrator was, and so on and so forth. I think that is key. So anybody who actually comes out with an agentic platform but doesn't let people build their own will actually see a huge back pressure on their own developers and engineers. And then you become going from what you thought you'd be a product company to being more of a consulting and a services company, which is not a bad thing. It's just that you have to be aware that you're going down that path versus going down the path of really being a product company with a platform, with a marketplace, with APIs and webhooks, with great SDKs. And the fact that you also have a team. At DevRev, we have a team called Applied AI Engineering Team. And Applied AI is basically the baton zone between a lot of LLM washing and AI washing and vector databases and all this stuff, and the mundane process of the enterprise. And how do you bridge the two together? It's the marketplace where these two actually come and meet. There's demand coming from the enterprise side. They do want to go and automate and reduce the human in the loop and see what they can do with customer support problems or what they can do with incident management problems and so on. And there's all this technology, OpenAI O1 and GPT O1 and Claude and Milvus and Pinecone and all this stuff. And there's this stuff in the middle. Like, how do you really go and match this and really bridge this? I think there'll be a need for a team that we all have to build, which is still using the APIs and webhooks of the platform, but extending on top of it. In the absence of which, I think we'll... And I go back and talk about this classic distinction between two companies. There is C3.ai, which also started 15 years ago, 2009. And in the same year, I think ServiceNow is probably a $150 million, not billion, $1 million company. Valuation-wise, it's a private company. They hadn't gone public yet in 2009. And look at the trajectory of the two companies. In 15 years, one company is worth 1,000x more, $150 billion. And the other one went from $0 to $2-3 billion. And these two trajectories, why are they different? Why is one went this way and the other one this way? Is because of platform thinking. The fact that you can actually extend this in the enterprise, they didn't call it App Store or whatever. They called it templates, composability, molecules. How do you really create relatable molecules for the HR department and for legal department and so on and so forth? I think it's very similar. You talked about composability in atoms and molecules. I think ServiceNow did this well almost 10, 15 years ago. And the fact that now they have a WYSIWYG where people can actually go and create automatons. Yeah, granted, they were deterministic nodes and it was simple programs that IT didn't want to code. I think now if you bring that along with probabilistic nodes and invoking LLMs along the way as well and doing a great job of deduplication and vector search and things of that nature, I think it goes a long distance. But you got to bring in the mundaneness of the marketplace and the mundaneness of applied AI engineering and the mundaneness of workflows along the way as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm also passionate about, we are all passionate about in the company at DevRev is, so what's the consumer grade side of this? Because there's an enterprise grade, which we talked about in the last 10 minutes. But what's the flip side of this? What's the yin to the yang? And I think that's, again, a big opportunity to differentiate. You and I have talked about this. Like, what's the presentation layer for this? Like you're talking about your own journey right now in A79i, which is people are expecting slide decks out of RAG pipelines as opposed to something that's just a bunch of text. And I think the UI for this AI is a very important thing that we should not And honestly, that's what ServiceNow did WYSIWYG. He said, we got to build a UI, because a lot of companies that probably existed, which you could write code for. There were a lot of people BAM companies and companies that thought that they'd done workflows better than ServiceNow, open source out there that never cared about the UI. I think the UI matters a lot. And we need to really go and think about the drag and drop too. But how delightful do you make it for the creators as well? I think in one of the episodes you talk about there's two separate personas, the consumer, and within consumer you have the end customer, but the employees. There's two different consumers. But there's a creator workflow as well. So how do you really do a great job for the creator workflows is also very important. What natural language can actually spit out 80% of a workflow. It recommends AI nodes for clustering, classification, deduplication, routing, all those things. But at the same time, these AI nodes are prescient enough to keep remembering user preferences and user clicks and things like that. So they understand human skills as much as managers understand human skills becomes really important. I think there is an immense opportunity here to really go and do agents, but also lift up the enterprise. We barely talked about data, by the way. Data is still at the core of a lot of data workflows. Simple if then else that happens when a data gets updated, when a metadata schema gets updated and things like that. It's a really hard problem. At DevRev, we've used this to be the Trojan horse in the enterprise, because if you don't do data integration, we call it airdropping, which is a two-way sync with existing systems, with Salesforce and ServiceNow and Zendesk and Jira and all these other systems out there. If you didn't get data integration, it's really hard to actually build great agents. And I'm not even talking about managerial workflows of analytics and what it means to really get data visualization right and replacing Tableau, which is a human in the loop right now. Data analyst is a human in the loop. There's immense data workflows with consumer side as well. But to really get the ETL side right as well is at the core of this stuff. And if we didn't do what we call airdrop right, we can't have these agents go and do 17 calls to 17 different systems. Because now we are basically saying this agentic experience, which is really a consumer experience, is now at the mercy of 17 different system calls. And they're all different systems. And by the way, some of them might break because somebody revoked authorization on the other side. So identity and multi-factor authorization and all those things play a big role. So our thinking has been that you need to bring the data into a common canonicalized knowledge graph, represented in 5 different ways. We have a graph database using Mongo. We have an inverted index using Elastic or OpenSearch. We have a vector database. We have a warehouse, and we have a time series analytical DuckDB based database that runs in the laptop. All of these are representations of the same knowledge graph. But if you did it in one knowledge graph versus going to 17 different systems, your agentic experience is going to be a whole lot more higher quality than you're twiddling your thumb waiting for a Salesforce API to complete. It's just impossible to get that right. In fact, most companies that will go down that path will become more like C3.ai than be more like companies that actually own the destiny of the knowledge graph, own the destiny of latencies, authorization, things of that nature.
Very cool. Let's have some fun.
Yeah.
Let's make some predictions.
Yeah.
Where do you think this whole industry is going to be 2 years from now and 5 years from now?
So in the next 2 years, I think the bubble bursts, the AI bubble. We're already seeing some cracks.
Yeah.
I feel all large companies that have deployed a lot, very few of them have figured out a way to monetize it. To be fair to Microsoft, at least they said we'll charge $10 for a knowledge worker and $20 for a developer out there. And I think they have probably been the fastest to monetize this. Everybody else is just smoking and sort of like, okay, when will this come and stuff like that. So I feel there is moment of reckoning in the next 2 years. And all startups should actually figure out a way to plow through it. And if they have a systemic way to think through this, mundane ways to think through this, great salespeople, great applied AI people, great sales engineers who are willing to be the Sherpas who take the enterprise through this journey, they'll actually come out fine on the other side. And this happened in the, I think, about 98 to 2002. There was a big sort of thing coming out on the other side. And companies like VMware survived and did really well. Google also, while we think it's a B2C company, they really figured out what monetization meant. And it was a B2B monetization. B2C was the data piece of it, which is the consumer workflow. But the creators of ads and publishers and people like that, they did a really good job of B2B. Analytics and billing and basically going and selling the heck out of what search really meant. I think they did really well. If anything, they copied from Yahoo, but they took it long distance. And they made it fairly applicable to the SMB market, as much the mid-market, the large enterprise as well. And I think companies that really have a great fan out into doing it great for startups, but also on the other side of the other, which is enterprise, they'll come out. We have over-deployed hardware. There will be at least one competitor to NVIDIA in the coming 3 years. I feel like it will not come from hyperscalers. Somebody who's specialized will actually do this well. Now, whether the question is, does AMD do a good enough job? I can definitely say Intel is not in this business. So there's some things we can actually, because there's too much going on in Intel's life as well. But there might be a player, maybe an open source version of RISC-V that actually builds something out. Maybe a CUDA emulator company does well here too, which is like, what's the VMware of emulation in this space? I think in the next 3 years it will happen.
I'm not so sure about over deployment of hardware though. Like my sense is that the next wave of improvements in AI is not going to come from necessarily bigger models, but in order to do a job, you're going to do hundreds and thousands of LLM calls and putting it all together. And as a result, like you're checking and rechecking and taking opinions from multiple models, and that requires a lot of inference hardware.
I don't think it will not get used. The question is in 18 months versus in 5 years. That is the real sort of rub. See, because the industry only reacts to the horizon issue. We all know that in the next 5 to 10 years, we have created great personas called AI agents, and they will make us more productive. Right? But the real thing is the next 18 months, how do you really plow through this sort of over deployment in the next 18 months? And by the way, the other prediction that I really am passionate about and I want this to work and succeed is a distributed model, which is more open source and more Llama and the ilk actually doing well. I would love for these things to work on a laptop. I'm a big fan of edge-based stuff. All our analytics gets done on the edge. And I really feel that's the only way to deliver features that are fair for the startup world as well. Because I don't want to deliver features that are only for the large enterprise. And unless you pay us $200,000, you can't get this. What about for a freemium company? And SaaS 2.0, I use the word SaaS 2.0 a lot these days, cannot take sides about this versus that. Freemium versus enterprise, or startup versus complex organizations. Google did this really well against Yahoo as well. All large companies that did well over time actually had a really good story on the small side. Maybe ServiceNow is an exception to this, but I think most companies really who went on to become $100 billion companies had to do both really well. So if we did something that was also equally applicable in the edge, on a laptop, hopefully in the next 3 years on the phone as well, I think we've done a really good job. One of those key sort of things around this will also be around product design, and we talked about incident management, but at the core of this is, did we capture the session? Did we understand the intent of the user? Can machines do a really good job of finding I don't know, like abandoned shopping carts and a lack of great product design and rage clicks and dead clicks and things of that nature. I think this could be a massive use case. You just probably read about Sonos and its mobile app rollout and how problematic it was that they had to go restate revenue. Say, look, or forecast for the next year. I think there's a big opportunity in user experience to be done right with AI. And I feel like these are big data problems because you'll be recording sessions of billions of sessions. And now humans can't go deal with it. So machines have to be involved in looking at patterns and correlations and anomalies and things like that. And it goes beyond just text. It will go into images and video and things like that, which would be big GPU hogs as well. But I don't think it's going to be in the next 18 months. We have to really think this through the next 3 to 5 years, actually. Now, predictions over the next 10 years, I think SaaS 1.0 will get, again, this is a self-fulfilling thing for me. SaaS 1.0, some companies will actually wither away. They'll become mainframes, and it's fine. I think there's a role for mainframes.
You want to name?
I feel like there's a big opportunity to disrupt mid-market companies like Zendesk, for example. But also the larger ones. I think the transition from on-prem to cloud has been problematic for Atlassian Jira. But also the transition from a multi-cloud thing for Salesforce to a fused Salesforce, which is like Oracle Fusion tried to do this thing 10 years ago. They had acquired a lot of products, applications out there, and then they had to spend 5, 6, 7 years fusing them through Oracle Fusion. And by the time they did all this stuff, they realized that it was not built for cloud. Similarly, I think Salesforce's ability to integrate everything. They have like 7, 8 different clouds, and AI is a different thing, and integration is a different thing, and data is a different thing. To really bring it all together, I think it'll be a difficult transition for them to really get through. And that's not to say that they won't be relevant, but the question is, will the action be around them or something else? And I think that, to me, is a big opportunity for startups like us as well. I don't know, you talk about your predictions of the next 3 years.
So one thing I'm really rooting for is a fundamental change in hardware to inference being analog. I think a lot of people have tried this in past and failed, so there is a lot of like scar tissues there. But imagine this, that how many transistor flips does it take to do a multiplication? It's of the order of hundreds, right? But if you're doing analog, it's just a resistor. Right? Like you tap in the middle of the resistor and you get that fixed number multiplication, which is what neural nets are doing a lot. Or if you're in the optical domain, it's just changing of the polarization that changes it. Now, there are a lot of difficulties. Like it's really hard to store state in analog, and the CAD tooling and stuff is not as sophisticated. So on one hand, you're doing like cutting edge, like 3 nanometer thing on the digital side. On the analog side, the technology is still old.
I'm surprised you actually went to the other extreme of analog, when I would have said you saying, you know what, quantum hardware is the way to align impedances between probabilistic code and probabilistic hardware. I thought that would be because that's the other end of the extreme, actually. That's the far right, this is the far left. But it looks like you're the far left.
I feel like I don't understand quantum computers enough. Let's have an episode.
I would love
so
to.
that we can.
I think it would be a great, because there is probabilistic hardware there. And states that are probabilistic and so on. But maybe we do some research and come back. The other piece that we should talk about maybe in a separate episode is, where does planning sit in all of this? What about Q-learning? O1, maybe just like how does the enterprise eventually use some of this stuff as well, will be a great episode in the coming weeks.
The other thing I find fascinating, so I was talking to a guy who's spent his life in banking, and he was saying that in 60s and 70s, the interest rate for your mortgage used to be huge. Like the gap between the Fed interest rate
70, 70 for sure.
and the common reader's interest rate used to be huge. And most of that was because they didn't have a way of figuring out bad risk from good risk.
Yeah.
And a huge difference that has happened with all the data and engineering coming in place
Specificity,
is that the gap between the Fed rate and the mortgage rate has shrunk, which has made so many people's life better.
Yeah.
So it's fine to talk about like Salesforce will do this and agents will do this in enterprise, but ultimately there's a huge overhead between sort of cost of producing goods and services and the cost at which they get deployed, because a lot of that money goes into management.
And by the way, training
Yeah.
and enablement. You think of Infosys has a whole university of 10, 20,000 fresh graduates coming to Mysore
Yeah.
to get trained.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruits like that, where I feel like rather than it taking away jobs, it will bring, right now we talk about 40 million developers, out of which maybe 10 million are being trained, struggling, coming out of college, not good enough, blah, blah. Colleges don't have great courseware and it's not industry ready. I think a lot of that stuff gets industry ready. If anything, the 40 million becomes 200 million because of prompts.
Yeah.
The fact that product managers can write prompts and sales ops people can write prompts for account deduplication and contact deduplication. I think that's the powerful piece of it. And how do we make these people interact with machines without going through the trombone of developers? There's only 40 million of those out there. And imagine if 500 million people can start interacting with machines.
Yeah.
I think that to me is AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's been fascinating, and I feel so passionate about the mundane world of the last 20, 30 years, but also the future of the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And if you can actually bring those together, nothing more agentic than that. Right?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Amit. And let's do an episode on Q learning and planning as well. And
we'll bring some strawberries.
let's do that. Let's do that. Also another episode on quantum and and I'll see whether I can dust off my books on transistors and analog as well at some point. Talk about the far left of this rather than the far right of this. Okay, great. Thanks again.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.